Two men, two crowns, two countries that still, in the year 2026, choose to be ruled, symbolically, at least, by a king. One inherited a job that has existed, in some form, for over 1,000 years. The other inherited a job that, technically, is younger than the smartphone. One wears the weight of an empire that no longer exists. The other wears the weight of a dictatorship his own grandfather helped end. Charles III of the United Kingdom. Felipe VI of Spain. Both men want you to believe monarchy still matters. They just don't agree on why. Two crowns, two paths. To understand what each king thinks a crown should be, you have to understand what kind of crown each man actually received. Because they are not the same kind of crown at all. Charles waited longer than anyone in British history to become king, over 70 years as heir, the longest apprenticeship for a job in the modern world. When Elizabeth II died in September 2022, he didn't inherit an institution in crisis. He inherited an institution at the height of its quiet, almost mythical stability, a monarchy that had outlived empires, world wars, and decades of Republican prediction simply by appearing, again and again, never to change. Felipe's inheritance looked nothing like that. His father, Juan Carlos I, had been the man credited with steering Spain peacefully out of the Franco dictatorship and into democracy, a genuine national hero, for a while. But by 2014, that legacy was in ruins. A lavish elephant hunting trip taken in the middle of Spain's worst economic crisis in a generation. A corruption case that sent his own son-in-law to prison. A king who, by the end, was an embarrassment to the institution he'd once saved. So Juan Carlos abdicated, and Felipe didn't inherit a monarchy at its peak. He inherited a monarchy that needed rescuing, by his own father's hand. Two coronations. Two completely different starting conditions. One king stepped into a finished cathedral. The other stepped into a building site, and was handed the tools. Neither man chose his job. But both were shaped, deliberately, for it, and the shaping tells you almost everything. Charles was sent to Gordonston, a famously austere boarding school built on cold showers and physical endurance, an experience he reportedly found closer to exile than education. What he gravitated toward instead, over the decades that followed, was ideas. Architecture, organic farming, alternative medicine, interfaith dialogue. He founded the Prince's Trust in 1976 to help disadvantaged young people. Decades before, royal charity work was an expected part of the job. He spent 50 years as a Prince of Wales who couldn't act on politics, so he built an identity instead around causes, sustainability and the environment chief among them, a subject he was talking about publicly as far back as the 1970s, long before it was fashionable. Felipe's formation was almost the opposite. He trained, in sequence, at all three of Spain's military academies, Army, Navy, Air Force, and qualified as a helicopter pilot. He competed as an Olympic sailor at the 1992 Barcelona Games. He studied law in Madrid, then international relations at Georgetown. Where Charles was shaped to advocate, Felipe was shaped to represent, to be a disciplined, uncontroversial, institutionally neutral figure who could stand at the head of a fragile young democracy without giving anyone a reason to doubt him. One king was built to have opinions. The other was built to seem like he doesn't have any at all. You can learn almost as much about a monarchy from who it lets become queen as from the king himself. Charles's path to marriage was, by his own family's standards, chaotic. His first marriage, to Diana, became one of the most scrutinized relationships in modern history, ending in divorce and, a year later, her death in 1997, a tragedy that came close to genuinely destabilizing public faith in the monarchy itself. His second marriage, in 2005, to Camilla Parker Bowles, a woman publicly blamed for years for the breakdown of the first marriage, required a decades-long, careful rehabilitation of public opinion before she could be crowned queen alongside him in 2023. Felipe's marriage tells a completely different story about what modern monarchy is willing to accept. In 2004, he married Letizia Ortiz, a divorced, middle-class television news journalist with no aristocratic background at all. She became the first commoner in Spanish history to be made queen. It was framed, deliberately, as proof that the Spanish crown could modernize, that it could connect itself to ordinary people rather than only to other royal houses. 2 queens. One who had to be forgiven by the public before she could wear the crown. One who was chosen, in part, because she represented everyone who never expected to wear one. This is where the two paths really split, not in biography but in function. What does each man actually do with the crown once it's on his head? Charles has leaned into monarchy as a platform for moral and cultural influence. Even constitutionally barred from politics, he has used the role to champion causes, climate change, faith dialogue, architecture, the natural world, turning the monarchy into something closer to a global moral voice with a flag attached. He presides over the Commonwealth, a network of 56 nations, giving the British Crown a kind of soft power reach that stretches far beyond the borders of the United Kingdom itself. His version of royalty is expansive, symbolic, outward-facing, a monarchy that exists partly to mean something to the world. Philippe's version of the job is almost defiantly smaller, and more domestic. Spain's monarchy isn't trying to project itself onto the world stage. It's trying to hold one country together. Felipe has spent much of his reign acting less like a global figurehead and more like an institutional stabilizer, a constitutional backstop whose entire value lies in not being controversial, in being the one figure that Spaniards across the political spectrum can still, mostly, agree to tolerate. And occasionally, that stabilizing role has required him to do something the British monarch almost never does: speak. In 2017, during Catalonia's independence crisis, Felipe gave a forceful televised address defending Spain's constitutional order, a far more direct political intervention than anything Charles or his mother ever attempted. It was controversial. It was also, by Philippe's own logic, exactly what the job required of him at that moment. Charles inherited a monarchy whose power lies in saying almost nothing. Felipe inherited one whose survival has, at times, depended on saying something. Every modern monarchy carries scandal. What separates these two men is whose scandal it is, and how each chose to handle it. Charles's defining crisis has been double-edged. On one hand, deeply personal. In early 2024 he was diagnosed with cancer following treatment for a separate condition, and has spent much of his reign so far governing while quietly undergoing treatment, only announcing in late 2025 that his schedule would finally be reduced going into 2026. On the other hand, institutional. His younger brother, Prince Andrew, spent years as the monarchy's most persistent liability over his association with the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, a controversy that culminated in Andrew being stripped of his title entirely, becoming, simply, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Charles's crisis, in other words, has been about managing damage from within his own house, while privately fighting his own health. Philippe's defining crisis came from the previous generation, and he handled it by doing something almost unthinkable for an institution built on family loyalty. As his father's corruption scandals deepened, Felipe didn't shield him. He stripped Juan Carlos of his royal allowance, distanced the crown publicly from his father's conduct, and watched as Juan Carlos eventually left Spain altogether for self-imposed exile in the United Arab Emirates in 2020, where he has lived ever since. It was, functionally, a son publicly amputating his own father from the institution to save it. 2 kings. 2 scandals neither of them caused. One spent his early reign protecting a brother while privately managing his own illness. The other spent his protecting the institution itself, from his own father. Here's the uncomfortable question underneath all of this: does it actually work? Do the people each king rules over still buy what he's selling? In Britain, monarchy is so embedded in national identity that even sustained scandal, Andrew, the rifts within the royal family, years of tabloid noise, hasn't seriously threatened the institution's existence. Republican sentiment exists, but it remains a minority position. The Crown's legitimacy in the UK isn't really up for a vote in most people's minds, it's closer to weather than to policy. Spain's relationship with its monarchy is far more conditional. Polling has shown Felipe with only moderate approval, solid, but unspectacular, hovering around the middle of the scale, with sharp regional divides, strong support in places like Andalusia, and the weakest support, unsurprisingly, in Catalonia, the very region whose independence movement he publicly confronted in 2017. Spain's monarchy was restored in 1975, after decades of dictatorship and an earlier republic before that, which means, unlike Britain's, it doesn't get to assume its own permanence. It has to keep re-earning it, generation by generation, scandal by scandal. Charles rules over a monarchy people mostly take for granted. Felipe rules over one that still has to make its case. So, what should royalty mean today? Put both men side by side, and you get two genuinely different answers, and neither one is obviously wrong. Charles's answer is that a monarch should be a symbol with a conscience, a figure who can't legislate, but can advocate, who can lend the enormous weight of tradition to causes that matter, from the environment to interfaith understanding, while holding together a commonwealth that spans the globe. His monarchy is about meaning. About continuity stretched across centuries, used in service of something bigger than the country that created it. Philippe's answer is almost the inverse, that a monarch's highest function isn't to mean something, but to hold something together, to be quiet enough, careful enough, and trusted enough by enough different people that he becomes the one stable point in a country still working out who it is. His monarchy is about utility. About a crown that has to justify its own existence every single day, because it watched, up close, what happens when a king forgets that it's conditional. One king is asking the world to believe in tradition. The other is asking his own country, simply, not to give up on him. Two crowns. Two paths. Neither man got to choose the one he was handed. Charles inherited permanence, and is spending it on purpose. Felipe inherited fragility, and is spending it on trust. Whether either idea of royalty survives the century is a question neither king can answer alone. That part, in the end, isn't up to the crown at all. It's up to everyone still willing to look up at one.